Hey y'all, Super X here, and today we're going to talk about RBA basics. The basics of building an RBA. Not sure where RBA came from. It should just be RA for Rebuildable Atomizer. They also have ones called Rebuildable Dripping Atomizers. What we're talking about is the typical RBA that we're putting on a bottom feed mod. Many of the exact same principles are going to apply to drippers, and that's all I've ever tried is bottom fed RBAs. Never done a dripper, but they're exactly the same without a hole coming through the middle of the bottom to feed the juice in. Here we have, let's get started with the real basics. Basically an RBA, to build it you're going to need your RBA. Here I've got a couple of them set up. You've got an RM2 on that Rio and an RM2 on this Rio. One with cotton in it, one without. You're going to need wire. The wire is Kanthal. I typically use Kanthal A1. It's just a little piece. I don't usually work with anything smaller than a 4-inch piece. Even though at the end you might only use like 1 or 2 inches, I don't know. But anything less than 4 inches is going to make it pretty difficult to wrap. So I start with 4 or 5. I don't really even measure. Just a nice big piece. Your wicking material. I use rolled cotton. So an RBA inside it is going to be the wire rolled up into a coil, which is that little thing right there, and then the cotton is inserted in, and that's pretty much it. Tools I will use beyond the wire and the wick that are mandatory is a very small screwdriver to loosen and tighten the post holes, a pair of nail clippers to trim the wire that sticks up. As you can see, there's a little sticking up there. Just trim it off. And I do at times, I did when I originally started, or if I build some kind of new configuration, use one of these little cartometers to build. What I've learned over the time I've been building is I keep an RBA base on that cartometer because I don't take them off the Rios much. I have them set up exactly like I like them. So unless it's some kind of major cleaning, which with unflavored nick base really doesn't happen because they're so clean, I'll build and mount it on here. And then I'll take it out and mount it on my my Rio. And then trim the legs. Now let's talk about coil types. This was a typical coil right here. I don't know if you can see that. I'm guessing you can. And yes, I am worked up on my coffee this morning. I'm liking it. That's basically what a coil was looking like. That's a standard coil that you might see a lot of people still run. You know, the old school theory that wraps can't touch, and about 4 wraps. Then along came these little micro coils, which as you can see on that screwdriver, the wraps are touching. It's much smaller and tighter. It's many more wraps. Same wire, but this is like a 16th inch or slightly less. For a microcoil, a 16th inch is about as big as you'll ever want the inside diameter to be, and you don't really want it any smaller than, say, I don't know, a 17 gauge needle or this 0.55 inch music wire that comes on this little jig. Now, I'm not going to get into wrapping in this video because I have other videos that show you how to make coils. I want to talk more about the basics and what happens. So basically, the smaller your diameter, in theory, the more wire you use, the more resistance you're going to use. So the smaller diameter allows more wraps. As you can see in this microcoil, it's got a ton of wraps on it. I believe that's 12 wraps, whereas this other massive coil over here, old school whatever coil, has like 4 wraps. This is probably the same resistance. This is probably about 1 ohm. This is probably about 1 ohm, because I bet if you were to measure the wire, it's about the same amount of wire used to make the wraps. So for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to hold this big old coil here. So essentially all you're doing is wrapping wire around some kind of I call it a mold. Some people call it a jig. I've heard it called a mandrel. You're wrapping it around it, and then you're going to mount it with it on there, and then ultimately you're going to slip this mandrel jig out, and the coil is going to be stuck there, just like that. So let's bring it down a scale. That's an old school coil. Micro coil, same thing, but a much smaller little wrapping device. As you can see, it's basically like one of those, and then you just mount it on your RBA, trim the tails, and this is going to cook for you. One thing I've learned is I always, whenever I'm mounting a coil, one leg, I leave it shorter than the other. That way I stick the long leg in the hole first, and then it gives you plenty of room to come back through and stick the short leg in. So again, not really about wrapping coils on this video. We got plenty of those. So if you're typically vaping around 1 ohm, a micro coil, you could probably go up, I would start with 1.5, even as high as 2. But typically I found that it's about the same warmth of a vape, a micro coil, as an old school coil like this, of about half the resistance. So in other words, a 2 ohm microcoil would probably perform like this. So when you add wraps to a coil, you add resistance, which means if you started with 10 wraps and you were at 1 ohm, if you add another couple of wraps, it'll probably go up to 1.2 or 1.3. So you add wraps to cool your vape. You lower wraps to make your vape hotter. Now let's talk about these RBAs right here. Here's 2 RBAs. Both of them the same. One of them without, basically what that coil does, so we've mounted a coil in there, and what the coil does when you fire the mod, is it heats up, and it heats your juice. Very important to keep your wick, whatever wick material, wet in there, because if not, you'll burn it. So that's all the coil on an RBA does. Heats up and heats your juice. This one has cotton in it. It's on the Rio Grande, and so when it heats it up, it produces vapor. Lots of vapor. Again, the cotton's in there, you keep it wet. Now, so you can see these 2 coils are mounted. I haven't adjusted this one. I wanted to show you guys how I adjusted, but if you could get a good look at this coil, you can see it's sort of sloped, because in the bottom of this RBA is the juice hole. You want good drainage in these RBAs. If there's a pool of juice collecting under your coil, it's going to spit and sputter. It's still going to vape decent, but it's not going to be the same as if just your wick is nice and saturated, squonking like every 2 hits. Keep the wick saturated. It's going to really produce awesome amounts of vapor. So here with this coil that's mounted, you can see I want it to slope. I haven't gotten to that point yet. I've mounted it, tightened my screws. And so what I want to do is, since that coil was built on this particular device, I'm going to take out that little mold there and use it to adjust the coil. When you mount your coil, you're going to keep it on your mold. And whatever your mold was, you're going to use it to stick back in your coil. I usually would take my battery out, but let's not waste time. Maybe for this video. But basically you want your coil, for me, I don't like a lot of throat hit. So if the coil is high up like this, you're going to get a lot of throat hit. If it's nice and low like this, you're going to get a lot less throat hit. So to balance that out, to keep it low, but to make sure it drains properly, I tilt my coils. Tilt them about like that. This is 27 gauge wire. You can do quite a bit with it. So I'm going to come back through here and push down a little more on this side, because that side got a little high. So that side gets to where it's almost touching the bowl, and the other side gets a slight elevation. Don't be afraid to tweak these things, but make sure your mold is all the way through. You don't want to tweak half of your coil. You want it to look nice and uniform. So there, you're lifted. It's a little higher on the non-juice hole side than I'd like. So I'm going to just push it down a little bit again on that side. So it's got a nice ramp to it. There you go. Now that to me is going to vape awesome, because not a lot of throat hit. You got your slope. It's low on one side, high on the other. You don't want to obstruct the juice hole. The way I mount it to my RBA in like a plan view, looking straight down on it, hold on, we'll see, is right about parallel to the posts and centered on the juice hole. Not close to the rim, but away from the post. You don't want your coil too close to the posts. Not a good idea. So that done. So now you've built your coil. You've definitely checked to make sure there's nothing it can short on. If you could see these little tails right here, let's see, that stick up, you don't want them to contact anything but that post. So you can use whatever it is to bend them up against there. So when you're looking down, if they contact anything metal, you're going to drop your spring and short your mod. Same with this coil. If it touches anything metal, the posts or anything else, it's going to short your mod. So with that common sense in mind, your coil is not touching anything metal, your tails aren't touching anything metal, the cap, anything but their holes, you're pretty good to go. If you build a microcoil, or any coil for that matter, that's around, if you don't have a meter and you build one that's a microcoil 10 wraps with 30 gauge or even 8 wraps, you're safe. You're going to be in a very good range for the Rio. You can add wraps to cool it. You can reduce wraps. I'm not big on sub-ohm. A lot of people are, but you're not going to run into trouble with that the same as if you get metal-to-metal contact. So again, that's kind of the basics of it. Very easy to set up an RBA. You're going to need very basic supplies. You're going to need wire. You can get it from Rob's site. I suggest if you've never built before, you just buy like some 28, some 30 gauge. I wouldn't even recommend 32. It's too flimsy. It's too high resistance. It's just not for these type of RBAs. Maybe if you have whatever kind of VV Novas or something, maybe that's the thing. But with these type of RBAs, I'm finding that 27 being the lowest for me, which I like. 30 is awesome. I really like it, but I like something a little more durable, like this 27 gauge. So I got some 28 and 29 coming. What that will mean is I can get a couple, I could reduce my resistance and add a few wraps. So I can add more, I can at 1.5 ohms or 1.2-ish, I can get a couple more wraps on there with that. Where in 30, if I get too many wraps, it gets too high in resistance. So I'm always shooting for somewhere around 1.5 these days. And these make it very easy to do. You can't get any easier than building this RBA. The only thing that's inside it is that coil and a piece of wick. Again, very basic common sense. Don't let any metal-to-metal contact. Keep your coil out away from the post but not touching the cap. Adjust the elevations properly to give you the right amount of throat hit. And you're going to be just rocking this thing. Once it's all said and done and built, you got your cap, your drip tip. Drip tip's in the cap. You just screw it on. And then just vape like crazy. Keep it wet, squonk it. One of the things I've learned is about the first 5 to 10 hits sometimes taste a little metallic and cottony. Just vape through those. I usually just kind of like primer puff them. Or I'll sit here on the mod and just let it go to town after I build it. You'll want to, like, I guess you could say you'll want to squonk it, watch the juice come up, wet everything down real good, let it soak. Doesn't take long, just a minute or two. I used to like let it soak for an hour back in the Hornet and these kind of coil days. And I was told that there's no need, and there is no need. And that's pretty much it, right? I would just let it run. I don't usually hold my button down for longer than about 3 seconds or so. Let it run. I mean, you can see that thing is just crazy on the vapor. Good drainage under the bottom. Perfect height for the right throat hit. Look, I'm just sticking my finger in the hole here, pushing the bottle, and up comes the juice, just like that. Wetting it all down. Let it drain back down. You see how that goes down? And then it's just game on. So there you go. Nothing to be afraid of. Wire, get it from Rob. Cotton, you get from CVS. And then once you realize that this is it and it's become sort of your hobby and you like rebuilding, then you can go to like Temco Industrial Power and order 100-foot spools. It's cheap. It's like, I think the lowest is about $5. The most, the 29 gauge I just bought was like $9 or $8. Very inexpensive stuff. You're also going to want to have a pair of good tweezers. I probably forgot to mention those to you. And if you don't have a Dark Zero drill coil jig, you can wrap on needles. People wrap on drill bits. Important thing to me is 1/16 inch mold or drill bit or needle is your perfect starting point. You can go down a little. I wouldn't get any bigger. It just starts to lose it at that point. It takes away from it, especially on these bottom feeders where you could squonk every hit if you want to. There's just no need to build anything bigger, unless, of course, you like it that way. But micro coils stay clean. Both of these coils have been on here for well over a week, probably a lot longer than a week. And they're clean as whistles. This one just smokes a little because there's a little juice down in the cup. Nothing simpler you can do. Those coils will last for months. That 27 gauge is my guess. And you maybe change your cotton wick every couple of days. I don't know. My juice, I can change it. I can go longer than a week. So anyway, that was pretty much it. Just wanted to kind of delve into portions of RBAs that we don't normally talk about. We're always talking about how to build them, but there's some basics on safety, setting them up right, keeping things clear, and how easy it is. Good luck. See ya.